So, today I'll be reading from the Mahadukkhakkhandha Sutta, the Great Mass of Stress, translated from the Pali by Thanissaro Bhikkhu. I have heard that on one occasion the Blessed One was staying near Savatthi at Jeta's Grove, Anagarika's monastery. Then, early in the morning, several monks put on their robes and, carrying their bowls and outer robes, went into Savatthi for alms. The thought occurred to them, it's still too early to go into Savatthi for alms. What if we were to visit the park of wanderers of other persuasions? So they headed to the park of the wanderers of other persuasions. On arrival, they exchanged courteous greetings with the wanderers of other persuasions. After an exchange of friendly greetings and courtesies, they sat to one side. As they were sitting there, the wanderers of other persuasions said to them, "Friends, Gautama the Contemplative describes the comprehension of sensuality. We too describe the comprehension of sensuality. He describes the comprehension of forms. We too describe the comprehension of forms. He describes the comprehension of feelings. We too describe the comprehension of feelings. So what is the difference? What the distinction? What the distinguishing factor between him and us in terms of his teaching and ours, his message and ours?" The monks, neither delighting nor disapproving of the words of the wanderers of other persuasions, got up from their seats, thinking, "We will learn the meaning of these words in the Blessed One's presence." Then, having gone for alms in Savatthi, after their meal, returning from their alms round, the monks went to the Blessed One and, on arrival, having bowed down to him, sat to one side. As they were sitting there, they told him what had happened. "Monks, when the wanderers of other persuasions say this, they are to be told, 'What, friends, with regard to sensuality, is the allure? What the drawback? What the escape? What, with regard to forms, is the allure? What the drawback? What the escape? What, with regard to feelings, is the allure? What the drawback? What the escape?' When asked this, they will not manage an answer, and, what is more, will get themselves into trouble. Why is that? Because it lies outside their range. Monks, in this world with its devas, maras, and brahmas, its contemplatives and brahmins, its royalty and common folk, I do not see anyone who can satisfy the mind with an answer to these questions, aside from a Tathagata's disciples, or someone who has heard it from them. Now, what is the allure of sensuality? These 5 strings of sensuality. Which 5? Forms cognizable via the eye, agreeable, pleasing, charming, endearing, fostering desire, enticing. Sounds cognizable via the ear, aromas cognizable via the nose, flavors cognizable via the tongue, tactile sensations cognizable via the body, agreeable, pleasing, charming, endearing, fostering desire, enticing. Now, whatever pleasure or joy arises in dependence on these 5 strands of sensuality, that is the allure of sensuality. And what is the drawback of sensuality? There is the case where, on account of the occupation by which a clansman makes a living, whether checking or accounting or calculating or plowing or trading or cattle tending or archery or as a king's man, or whatever the occupation may be, he faces cold, he faces heat, being harassed by mosquitoes and flies, wind and sun and creeping things, dying from hunger and thirst. Now this drawback in the case of sensuality, this mass of stress visible here and now, has sensuality for its reason, sensuality for its source, sensuality for its cause, the reason being simply sensuality. If the clansman gains no wealth while thus working and striving and making effort, he sorrows, grieves, and laments, beats his breast, becomes distraught. "My work is in vain! My efforts are fruitless!" Now this drawback too in the case of sensuality, this mass of stress visible here and now, has sensuality for its reason, sensuality for its source, sensuality for its cause, the reason being simply sensuality. If the clansman gains wealth while thus working and striving and making effort, He experiences pain and distress in protecting it. How will neither kings nor thieves make off with my property, nor fire burn it, nor water sweep it away, nor hateful heirs make off with it? And as he thus guards and watches over his property, kings or thieves make off with it, or fire burns it, or water sweeps it away, or hateful heirs make off with it. And he sorrows, grieves, and laments, beats his breast, becomes distraught. What was mine is no more! Now this drawback too in the case of sensuality. This mass of stress visible here and now has sensuality for its reason, sensuality for its source, sensuality for its cause, the reason being simply sensuality. Again, it is with sensuality for the reason, sensuality for the source, sensuality for the cause, the reason being simply sensuality, that kings quarrel with kings, nobles with nobles, Brahmins with Brahmins, householders with householders, mother with child, child with mother, father with child, child with father, brother with brother, sister with sister, brother with sister, sister with brother, friend with friend. And then in their quarrels, brawls, and disputes, they attack one another with fists or with clods or with sticks or with knives, so that they incur death or deadly pain. Now this drawback too in the case of sensuality. This mass of stress visible here and now has sensuality for its reason, sensuality for its source, sensuality for its cause, the reason being simply sensuality. Again, it is with sensuality for the reason, sensuality for the source, that men, taking swords and shields and buckling on bows and quivers, charge into battle massed in double array, while arrows and spears are flying and swords are flashing, and there they are wounded by arrows and spears, and their heads are cut off by swords, so that they incur death or deadly pain. Now this drawback too in the case of sensuality. This mass of stress visible here and now has sensuality for its reason, sensuality for its source, sensuality for its cause, the reason being simply sensuality. Again, it is with sensuality for the reason, sensuality for the source, that men, taking swords and shields and buckling on bows and quivers, charge slippery bastions while arrows and spears are flying and swords are flashing. And there they are splashed with boiling cow dung and crushed under heavy weights, and their heads are cut off by swords, so that they incur death or deadly pain. Now this drawback too in the case of sensuality. This mass of stress visible here and now has sensuality for its reason, sensuality for its source, sensuality for its cause, the reason being simply sensuality. Again, it is with sensuality for the reason, sensuality for the source, that men break into windows, seize plunder, commit burglary, ambush highways, commit adultery. And when they are captured, kings have them tortured in many ways. They flog them with whips, beat them with canes, beat them with clubs. They cut off their hands, cut off their feet, cut off their hands and feet. They cut off their ears, cut off their noses, cut off their ears and noses. They subject them to the porridge pot, the polished shell shave, the rahu's mouth, the flaming garland, the blazing hand, the grass duty ascetic, the bark dress ascetic, the burning antelope, the meat hooks, the coin gouging, the lie pickling, the pivot on a stake, the rolled up bed. They have them splashed with boiling oil, devoured by dogs, impaled alive on stakes. They have their heads cut off with swords so that they incur death or deadly pain. Now this drawback too in the case of sensuality. This mass of stress visible here and now has sensuality for its reason, sensuality for its source, sensuality for its cause, the reason being simply sensuality. Again, it is with sensuality for the reason, sensuality for the source, that people engage in bodily misconduct, verbal misconduct, mental misconduct. Having engaged in bodily, verbal, and mental misconduct, they, on the breakup of the body, after death, reappear in the plane of deprivation, the bad destination, the lower realms, in hell. Now this drawback too in the case of sensuality. This massive stress in the future life has sensuality for its reason, sensuality for its source, sensuality for its cause, the reason being simply sensuality. And what, monks, is the escape from sensuality? The subduing of desire passion for sensuality, the abandoning of desire passion for sensuality. That is the escape from sensuality. That any Brahmins or contemplatives who do not discern, as it actually is, the allure of sensuality as allure, the drawback of sensuality as drawback, the escape from sensuality as escape, would themselves comprehend sensuality, or would rouse another with the truth so that, in line with what he has practiced, he would comprehend sensuality, that is impossible. But that any Brahmins or contemplatives who discern, as it actually is, the allure of sensuality as allure, the drawback of sensuality as drawback, the escape of sensuality as escape, would themselves comprehend sensuality, or would rouse another with the truth so that, in line with what he has practiced, he would comprehend sensuality. That is possible. Now what, monks, is the allure of forms? Suppose that there were a maiden of the noble caste, the Brahmin caste, or the householder class, 15 or 16 years old, neither too tall nor too short, neither too thin nor too plump, neither too dark nor too pale. Is her beauty and charm at that time at its height? Yes, Lord. Whatever pleasure and joy arise in dependence on that beauty and charm, that is the allure of forms. And what is the drawback of forms? There is the case where one might see that very same woman at a later time, when she's 80, 90, 100 years old, aged, roof rafter crooked, bent over, supported by a cane, palsied, miserable, broken-toothed, gray-haired, scanty-haired, bald, wrinkled, her body all blotchy. What do you think? Has her earlier beauty and charm vanished and the drawback appeared? Yes, Lord. This, monks, is the drawback of forms. Again, one might see that very same woman sick, in pain, and seriously ill, lying soiled with her own urine and excrement, lifted up by others, laid down by others. What do you think? Has her earlier beauty and charm vanished and the drawback appeared? Yes, Lord. This too, monks, is the drawback of forms. Again, one might see that very same woman as a corpse cast away in a charnel ground, 1 day, 2 days, 3 days dead, bloated, livid, and oozing. What do you think? Has her earlier beauty and charm vanished and the drawback appeared? Yes, Lord. This too, monks, is the drawback of forms. Again, one might see that very same woman as a corpse cast away in a charnel ground, picked at by crows, vultures, and hawks, by dogs, hyenas, and various other creatures, a skeleton smeared with flesh and blood, connected with tendons, a fleshless skeleton smeared with blood, connected with tendons, a skeleton without flesh or blood, connected with tendons, bones detached from their tendons, scattered in all directions, here a hand bone, there a foot bone, here a shin bone, there a thigh bone, here a hip bone, there a backbone, here a rib, there a breastbone, here a shoulder bone, there a neck bone, here a jawbone, there a tooth, here a skull. The bones whitened, somewhat like the color of shells, piled up, more than a year old, decomposed into a powder. What do you think? Has her earlier beauty and charm vanished, and the drawback appeared? Yes, Lord. This too, monks, is the drawback of forms. And what, monks, is the escape from forms? The subduing of desire-passion for forms, the abandoning of desire-passion for forms. That is the escape from form. That any Brahmins or contemplatives who do not discern, as it actually is, the allure of forms as allure, the drawback of forms as drawback, the escape from forms as escape, would themselves comprehend form, or would rouse another with the truth so that, in line with what he has practiced, he would comprehend form, that is impossible. But that any Brahmins or contemplatives who discern, as it actually is, the allure of forms as allure, the drawback of forms as drawback, the escape from forms as escape, would themselves comprehend form, or would rouse another with the truth so that, in line with what he has practiced, he would comprehend form, that is possible. Now what, monks, is the allure of feelings? There is the case where a monk, quite withdrawn from sensuality, withdrawn from unskillful mental qualities, enters and remains in the first jhana, rapture and pleasure born from withdrawal, accompanied by directed thought and evaluation. At that time, he does not intend his own affliction, the affliction of others, or the affliction of both. He feels a feeling totally unafflicted. The unafflicted, I tell you, is the highest allure of feelings. Again, the monk, with the stilling of directed thoughts and evaluations, enters and remains in the second jhana, rapture and pleasure born of composure, unification of awareness free from directed thought and evaluation, internal assurance. With the fading of rapture, he remains equanimous, mindful, and alert, and senses pleasure with the body. He enters and remains in the third jhana, of which the noble ones declare, equanimous and mindful, he has a pleasant abiding. With the abandoning of pleasure and pain, as with the earlier disappearance of elation and distress, he enters and remains in the fourth jhana, purity of equanimity and mindfulness, neither pleasure nor pain. At that time, he does not intend his own affliction, the affliction of others, or the affliction of both. He feels a feeling totally unafflicted. The unafflicted, I tell you, is the highest allure of feelings. And what is the drawback of feelings? The fact that feeling is inconstant, stressful, subject to change. This is the drawback of feelings. And what is the escape from feelings? The subduing of desire, passion for feelings. The abandoning of desire, passion for feelings. That is the escape from feelings. That any Brahmins or contemplatives who do not discern, as it actually is, the allure of feelings as allure, the drawback of feelings as drawback, the escape from feelings as escape, would themselves comprehend feeling, or would rouse another with the truth so that, in line with what he has practiced, he would comprehend feeling, that is impossible. But that any Brahmins or contemplatives who discern, as it actually is, the allure of feelings as allure, the drawback of feelings as drawback, the escape from feelings as escape, would themselves comprehend feeling, or would rouse another with the truth so that, in line with what he has practiced, he would comprehend feeling, that is possible. That is what the Blessed One said. Gratified, the monks delighted in the Blessed One's words.
Sadhu karanda damase.
Sadhu, 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 anumodai. Questions, comments?
Does anyone know what the Pali word that Ajahn Jeff renders as, what is it, passion desire? Is that, do you know what that one is?
Doesn't say in here.
What is it? Hmm?
I was going to say, it doesn't say in here, so I don't know.
Because it might be kama chanda, but it seems a bit, well, it could be, but it also, you usually, I don't know, maybe you'd apply that to the jhanas. No.
If I had my phone, I could check. Those access the insight, as you can switch back and forth between the Pali and the English. I just assume tanha, but then that's maybe not a valid. Oh, you got yours? Oh, yeah. Go for it.
Majjhima Nikaya 13.
Okay. Chandaraka. That's interesting. Yeah, I think it's Chandaraka. So there you go. combination they didn't know exist. Thank you. Any other questions?
So, a lot of this, a lot of the Buddha's admonition in really strong words are used with relation to the 5 chords of sensual pleasure. But off the top of my head, I don't really recall with the 6th sense sphere, with the mind and mental objects. Could you describe maybe like its relationship towards like this kind of teaching, like Chandaraga or?
Well, one is the because it's a whole different classification because it's looking at the actual objects of sensuality as opposed to the delight in it, and so that like the chords of sensual desire are a different kind of object. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, that is a so it's using a different, not even bringing in the mind base, and of course the delight in form is in that's your different like the 5 chords of sensual pleasure are one, and that goes to the objects. And then when you say delight in form, delight in feeling, that's the actual mind door.
So it's because that mental factor is already been caused by the indulgence or desire for the external world, and that's why the Buddha has the sutta where he talks about I think it's a Brahmin who's saying that the self indulges in the senses. And then really the mind is what shares in these sense doors. And it's a separate type of consciousness, but it's still indulging in that.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about the examples, and so the first one for sensuality is talking about, with all the things about the livelihood, it's like things that can be bought with wealth. Because you have to work for the money and then guard that and then fight with other people and compete and all that sort of stuff. But then sensuality is, for monks and males, it was referring to, it seemed like it was talking about, or I'm sorry, for forms, it was referring to a woman, a young woman.
Yeah.
And I just didn't quite get the difference between the example for sensuality and for forms. It seems like they're it's almost interchangeable in that.
It is interchangeable, but it's also there's it's pretty specific when it's it's the most vivid example for especially for a monk. It's easy to relate to. It's fairly straightforward.
But that would still be, it would be connected to sensuality, right?
Well, these were, sometimes you have, the Buddha is using categories in order to, if you can put it, well, it's just one thing, but then if you break it up into different things, you can reflect on it from different ways, and that's it's a how do you say, a didactic way of being able to, so you can get a handle on the different ways that the mind creates suffering. Because that's what the Mahadukkhakkhandha, that's the great mass of suffering. So it's looking at the different ways that we create suffering. And you can say, well, it's just created out of tanha and upadana, but then it's helpful to have a hat to hang things on there, to be able to recognize, okay, these different patterns that the mind takes, both for oneself and for the world around one, breaking it up a bit. So it's more like a teaching device as opposed to like a categorical truth.
Sure, but I was just wondering, in this situation, why they're separate, are they I mean, it's like, what's the purpose of?
Purpose is because one of the biggest things that if you're a monk and fantasize about form, what is it usually? You're not fantasize. That's the biggest fantasy.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, that was in the Buddha's time, and I don't think it's changed a whole lot.
You donuts too.
Yes. It's a bit of a sublimation, but
it also sounds like maybe these categories were asked by these wanderers of other sects, and so maybe it wasn't something that the Buddha made up as a set of categories, but he was maybe playing off of their question and choosing his emphasis on it, maybe.
But I think it does come up in other places where the Buddha separates these out a bit.
Somewhere, I can't remember where, a big Bodhi actually kind of draws that question up as something you mentioned, like, because the form description, of the young woman is so, much of a sensual kind of an experience, and he also says, and he just drew it up as gee, it is interesting that he separated out, and now it doesn't know why, but also pointed out that there's other kinds of form that can be, looked at with that same model, and that the danger is kind of more along the lines of the impermanence of it, the transitoriness of it.
I just have to say it's really nice to hear the sutta teaching, just hear it, and then all the repetition and everything. And Anagarika Jordan did a good job of reading it and putting emphasis on it.
Yeah, no, they are suttas, so that they're meant to be heard. Because the mind, I think that's the mind actually absorbs it much better by hearing it than by seeing it or reading it for oneself. We tend to skip.
So important. This might sound just a little bit. May sound a little bit like a complex kind of question, but it's how does one know whether a certain practice is right for them at that time, and whether because it might seem like some people might incline towards a certain practice that they might really enjoy doing. Some people might do a certain practice that they might be really averse to doing, and they just it drains a lot of their energy.
As a rule of thumb, then it's usually one is the sense of does it increase wholesome states of mind and decrease unwholesome states of mind. And just because one likes or dislikes something doesn't necessarily mean that it's not helping to, say, increase wholesome states and decrease the unwholesome. So that one might have, say, an aversion to body contemplation, say, and then but then you start recognizing, it's actually, despite that, it's actually helping the mind to become more settled. Or similarly with loving kindness. It's despite the kind of the feeling of resistance, but the underlying quality of the mind is actually changing.
And that requires results not only just from one day, but for weeks and weeks.
Right, exactly. It's not just looking at the immediate feeling, but looking at what's the actual result, which is very much a part of what the exploration of our practice is looking at over time. What are the causes that we're putting in, the results that we're experiencing, recognizing that causal process.
I had a question. I don't know if Bhikkhu Bodhi or if anybody knows of the wanderers that were spoken about in the beginning that asked these questions, if it detailed like where they were coming from or what their teachings were, because it was kind of, I didn't understand.
It's a generic, the wanderers of other persuasions. I mean, there's a whole range of different wanderers. Some who actually have, pretty good. They accept the law of karma. They have a good foundation in sila, and then you go to the whole range of really loopy philosophical beliefs, which are both nihilistic and quite amoral, or if not immoral. But it covers a huge range. It's just can't remember the Pali, because they put it into they use the same word in Thai.
Paribhajika.
Yeah, the paribhajika. So it's like wanderers of other persuasions. Okay.